The evening sky had already turned dark when Dr. Anderson finished her final rounds at the Children's Hospital. She had spent the last 12 hours performing emergency surgery on a young patient, and the successful outcome left her feeling satisfied despite her exhaustion. As she drove her silver Honda Civic through the quiet streets of downtown, her thoughts drifted to the warm dinner waiting at home. The flash of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror interrupted her peaceful drive. She checked her speedometer. She had been going exactly at the speed limit. Confused but composed, she pulled over to the side of the road, making sure to stop in a well-lit area near a 24-hour convenience store. Following the safety protocols she always taught her teenage patients, she turned on her interior lights, placed both hands visible on the steering wheel, and took slow, steady breaths to stay calm. Through her side mirror, she watched as Officer Reynolds approached, his footsteps heavy and deliberate on the pavement. License and registration, he barked before she could even roll down her window completely. The harsh tone caught her off guard. It seemed unnecessary for a routine traffic stop. Still maintaining her professional composure, Dr. Anderson reached slowly for her purse. "Officer, may I ask why I was pulled over?" she inquired politely, handing over her documents along with her hospital ID that had accidentally slipped out with her license. The officer's eyes narrowed as he noticed the prestigious hospital credentials, his grip tightening visibly on her license. "You think being a doctor puts you above the law?" Officer Reynolds sneered, completely ignoring her question. His sudden shift in demeanor sent a chill down her spine. Something wasn't right about this situation. Dr. Anderson had already pressed the emergency call button on her phone, connecting to her husband at home. As a high-ranking federal agent, he had always insisted on having a direct line during her late-night drives. The phone lay face down on the passenger seat, silently transmitting everything. "Sir, I'm simply asking about the violation," she responded calmly, her years of handling high-pressure situations in the operating room helping her maintain her composure. "I believe I was following all traffic laws." The convenience store's security cameras and Officer Reynolds' own body cam captured what happened next. His face contorted with unexplained anger, and without warning, he struck her across the face, a shocking act of unprovoked violence that would soon spark a nationwide conversation. What Officer Reynolds didn't know was that his actions had just set in motion a chain of events that would reshape the entire police department. On the other end of that phone call, a federal agent was already mobilizing a response that would follow every letter of the law, ensuring justice would be served not through revenge, but through proper legal channels. The security footage showed several witnesses at the convenience store reaching for their phones, their faces reflecting shock and concern. A young nursing student who had just finished her shift recognized Dr. Anderson from the hospital and began recording while quietly calling 911 for backup. Inside her car, Dr. Anderson touched her cheek where the officer had struck her, her hand trembling slightly. But her voice remained steady as she spoke clearly for the phone's microphone. "Officer, I am formally requesting your badge number and the presence of a supervisor." Her medical training kicked in as she mentally documented every detail of the incident, knowing it would be crucial later. The store's overnight clerk had already pulled up the security footage on their system, marking it for preservation. 2 other drivers had stopped safely nearby, their dashcams capturing additional angles of the incident. In an age where accountability was just a camera click away, Officer Reynolds' actions would not go unnoticed or undocumented. Unknown to the officer, his body camera's red light blinked steadily, recording his every move and word. The same technology meant to protect officers during legitimate police work was about to become crucial evidence in a case that would demonstrate how justice should really work, not through violence or revenge, but through proper legal channels and professional investigation. As backup units began arriving on scene, drawn by multiple 911 calls from concerned citizens, the first chapter of this incident was drawing to a close. But for Officer Reynolds, Dr. Anderson, and the entire police department, this was just the beginning of a story that would lead to real, lasting change in how law enforcement operated in their community. The tension in the air could be cut with a knife as Officer Reynolds stood there, his hands still raised from the slap. The convenience store's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the scene, while nearby cars slowed down, their drivers watching the situation unfold with growing concern. Dr. Anderson's cheek stung, but her voice remained remarkably steady. "Officer, I'm going to stay perfectly still, but I want to inform you that this entire interaction is being recorded." Her words seemed to fuel his anger rather than calm him down. "Get out of the vehicle!" Officer Reynolds shouted, his face reddening. His hand moved threateningly toward his belt. The young nursing student recording from the convenience store doorway gasped audibly, her phone capturing every second. Back at their home, Dr. Anderson's husband sat rigid in his home office, listening intently through the phone connection. As a federal agent with years of experience, he knew exactly how this situation should be handled, not with revenge or violence, but with proper procedure and justice. "Step out of the car now," Officer Reynolds demanded again, this time reaching for the door handle himself. Dr. Anderson remained calm, her hands visible on the steering wheel. Her years of handling crisis situations in the emergency room had taught her how to stay composed under pressure. "I'm respectfully declining to exit the vehicle until a supervisor arrives," she stated clearly, her voice carrying to all the witnesses' recording devices. "I don't feel safe, and I have the right to request a supervising officer." The convenience store clerk had already called the police station directly, reporting an officer's concerning behavior. 2 more patrol cars were approaching in the distance, their lights reflecting off the storefront windows. Officer Reynolds' body camera caught every word as he launched into a tirade about respect for authority, his professional demeanor completely abandoned. The small crowd of witnesses grew, maintaining a safe distance while ensuring everything was documented. Inside her car, Dr. Anderson focused on breathing steadily, just as she taught her young patients when they were scared. She could hear her husband's calm voice through the phone, telling her that help was already on the way. A particularly chilling moment came when Officer Reynolds radioed in, claiming Dr. Anderson was being combative. The dashcam audio clearly captured his false report, while the video showed her sitting perfectly still, hands visible, speaking calmly. The first backup unit arrived, Officer Chen, known in the community for her level-headed approach. She took in the scene quickly, the gathering witnesses with phones raised, the obviously agitated Officer Reynolds, and a completely composed doctor in her car. "Step aside, Reynolds," Officer Chen commanded, her tone professional but firm. "I'm taking over this stop." The relief on the witnesses' faces was visible, but Officer Reynolds wasn't done. "You don't have the authority to," he began, but was cut off by the arrival of Sergeant Wilson, who had been specifically requested by the station after the clerk's call. "Reynolds, stand down immediately," the sergeant ordered. His experienced eyes had already noticed several protocol violations. "Return to your vehicle and wait for me there." The next few minutes unfolded like a textbook example of proper police procedure. Sergeant Wilson approached Dr. Anderson's car calmly, maintaining a respectful distance. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Wilson. Are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" Dr. Anderson's response was clear and professional. "I would like to file a formal complaint, and I need medical documentation of this assault." Her phone was still recording, her husband still listening, as she provided a precise account of what had occurred. The young nursing student approached Officer Chen, offering to share her video evidence. Other witnesses stepped forward as well, while the convenience store clerk had already prepared copies of the security footage. As Officer Reynolds sat fuming in his patrol car, he was unaware that his actions had just triggered a chain of events that would lead to one of the most thorough internal investigations the department had ever seen. His body camera footage, combined with multiple witness videos and the security tapes, would tell a story that couldn't be denied or explained away. The night air had grown cooler, but nobody left the scene. They'd all sensed they were witnessing something important, not just an incident, but the beginning of real change. Dr. Anderson's husband was already coordinating with his federal colleagues, ensuring this case would receive the attention it deserved. This wasn't going to be a story about revenge. It would become something far more important, a testament to how justice should really work, how proper procedures and documentation could bring about lasting change, and how one incident, properly handled, could lead to meaningful reform in law enforcement practices. The emergency room buzzed with quiet activity as Dr. Anderson sat on the examination table, her husband standing nearby, phone in hand. The fluorescent lights highlighted the red mark on her cheek as a nurse carefully documented her injury. Her husband, still in his FBI windbreaker, hadn't wasted a single minute since hearing the incident unfold through their phone connection. "Walk me through it one more time," said Detective Walsh, her notebook open as she recorded every detail. The hospital security camera hummed quietly in the corner, adding another layer of documentation to the growing mountain of evidence. Dr. Anderson's voice remained steady as she recounted the events for what felt like the 10th time that night. Meanwhile, across town at the police station, Officer Reynolds sat in an interview room, his supervisor and a union representative beside him. The internal affairs investigator played back the body camera footage, pausing at key moments. Reynolds' face grew paler with each damning frame. "Your body camera shows no traffic violation," the investigator noted, his tone professional but firm. "Can you explain why you initiated the stop?" The silence that followed spoke volumes. The union representative shifted uncomfortably in his chair, knowing this wasn't a case he could easily defend. Back at the hospital, Dr. Anderson's husband worked the phone like a conductor leading an orchestra. His years of federal service had taught him the importance of proper procedure. Each call he made set another piece of the investigation in motion: Civil Rights Division, Internal Affairs, Police Accountability Board. This wasn't revenge. This was justice done right. The young nursing student who had recorded the incident arrived at the hospital, still in her scrubs from her shift. "I uploaded the video to a secure cloud drive," she explained, sharing access with the detective. "And I've got 5 other witnesses who are willing to make statements." The convenience store's night clerk had already finished his shift, but not before making sure every second of security footage was properly preserved and backed up. "I've seen things get swept under the rug before," he told the investigating officers. "Not this time. Everything's time-stamped and saved in 3 different places." In his home office, the police chief rubbed his temples as he reviewed the preliminary reports. The incident was barely hours old, but his phone hadn't stopped ringing. News outlets were already picking up the story, and social media was buzzing with clips from witness videos. This wasn't going to be something they could quietly handle internally. Dr. Anderson's colleagues from the hospital started showing up, offering support and their own statements about her character and professionalism. "She's the calmest person in our trauma unit," one nurse told the investigators. "If she says she was following traffic laws, you can take that to the bank." Officer Chen, who had arrived as backup at the scene, sat in her patrol car writing her report. Her dashcam had captured crucial moments from a different angle, and her account of Officer Reynolds' behavior would prove vital to the investigation. She'd seen warning signs in his behavior before, but now she regretted not speaking up sooner. The FBI's Civil Rights Division was already assembling a task force. Dr. Anderson's husband's colleagues knew him as a by-the-book agent who never called in favors. If he was involved, the case deserved their full attention. They began the meticulous process of reviewing Officer Reynolds' past conduct, looking for patterns that might have been missed. In the hospital parking lot, local community leaders gathered, having heard about the incident through various channels. They weren't there to protest or cause trouble. They came to ensure proper procedures were followed and to show support for a process done right. The police department's Internal Affairs Division worked through the night, gathering statements, securing evidence, and building a timeline. They knew the spotlight would be intense, and everything had to be handled perfectly. This case had the potential to set new standards for police accountability. State police investigators arrived to provide an independent review of the incident. Fresh eyes would ensure nothing was overlooked, no detail dismissed. They set up in a conference room, walls soon covered with photos, timelines, and witness statements. As the night turned to early morning, Dr. Anderson finally headed home, her husband by her side. They knew the coming days would be challenging, but they were committed to seeing this through the right way. This wasn't about revenge or headlines. It was about ensuring that proper procedures and accountability prevailed. Real change was possible, but only if they stayed focused on justice rather than vengeance. Dawn broke over the FBI field office as Dr. Anderson's husband led a briefing with his civil rights team. The conference room walls displayed dozens of photos and documents, previous complaints, witness statements, and timeline charts. Coffee cups littered the table as agents pored over Officer Reynolds' service record. "We've uncovered 6 similar incidents in the past 2 years," announced one analyst, spreading files across the table. all swept under the rug with minimal investigation. The room grew quiet as they examined the pattern emerging from the paperwork. What had happened to Dr. Anderson wasn't an isolated incident. At police headquarters, internal affairs investigators worked methodically through the evidence. The young detective leading the case laid out surveillance footage from multiple angles, convenience store cameras, dashcams, body cameras, and witness videos. The story they told was undeniable. "Look at this pattern," she pointed to a timeline on her whiteboard. "He specifically targets professionals during night shifts. Doctors, lawyers, business executives, all with similar complaints about aggressive behavior." Her colleague nodded, adding another pin to their investigation board. The police chief sat in his office, watching news coverage of the incident spread across local stations. His phone kept buzzing with messages from city officials and community leaders. This wasn't just another internal investigation. This was a watershed moment for the department. In the evidence room, technicians carefully processed Officer Reynolds' patrol car computer. His search history revealed concerning patterns. He had run background checks on drivers without cause, specifically looking up their professions and personal information. Each discovery added another piece to the puzzle. The FBI's forensic team arrived, setting up their equipment to enhance audio from the body camera footage. "We need every word clear as day," the lead technician explained. "No room for misinterpretation." Their sophisticated software revealed conversations that the original recordings had missed. Community meetings sprang up across town as word spread. But these weren't angry protests. They were constructive dialogues between citizens and law enforcement officials. Dr. Anderson's husband attended several, sharing how proper legal channels could create real change. At the courthouse, a judge reviewed the mounting evidence in her chambers. Search warrants were signed, allowing investigators to dig deeper into Officer Reynolds' personal and professional history. Each warrant was carefully worded to ensure every piece of evidence would be admissible. The police union representatives met with their legal team, reviewing the case details. Usually quick to defend officers, even they could see this situation was different. "This isn't a case we can fight," the lead attorney admitted. "The evidence is too clear, too well documented." Back at the FBI office, data analysts compiled statistics from police stops over the past 3 years. Patterns emerged showing systematic issues that went beyond one officer. Dr. Anderson's case was becoming a catalyst for examining entire departmental procedures. State police investigators joined the case, providing an independent perspective. They set up in a separate office, cross-referencing witness statements with physical evidence. Their involvement ensured the investigation remained impartial and thorough. The hospital where Dr. Anderson worked provided security footage showing her clock-out time, proving she had no reason to rush home. Her colleagues submitted statements about her character and professional conduct, painting a picture of someone who always followed rules and procedures. In the digital forensics lab, experts analyzed Officer Reynolds' work emails and communications. They discovered concerning conversations with other officers, suggesting a deeper cultural problem within certain precincts. Each revelation added urgency to the investigation. As evening approached, Dr. Anderson's husband coordinated with civil rights attorneys who had handled similar cases across the country. They weren't just building a case against one officer, they were creating a blueprint for systematic reform that could be implemented nationwide. The investigation continued with methodical precision. Every piece of evidence was cataloged, every witness statement recorded, every procedure followed to the letter. This wasn't about rushing to judgment or seeking revenge. It was about ensuring justice was served properly, thoroughly, and legally. The investigation room hummed with activity as the FBI team laid out their findings. 3 weeks had passed since the incident, and what started as a single case had uncovered a troubling pattern of behavior throughout the department. The wall-mounted screens displayed data, charts, and statistics that told a story bigger than anyone had initially expected. "We've confirmed 15 similar incidents," the lead investigator announced, pointing to a timeline stretching back 3 years. Most victims were professionals working night shifts, doctors, nurses, attorneys. All of them faced aggressive behavior during routine traffic stops. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. In the police chief's office, the internal affairs team presented their report. The evidence was overwhelming. body camera footage, witness videos, patrol car dashcams, and security recordings from nearby businesses. Each piece added to a picture that couldn't be ignored or explained away. The young nursing student's video had gone viral, but not in the usual way. Instead of causing outrage, it became a teaching tool. Police academies across the state were already using it to demonstrate how a single officer's actions could reveal systemic problems that needed addressing. Dr. Anderson's husband sat in his FBI office, reviewing witness statements. His team had handled everything by the book, building an airtight case that would lead to real change. The focus wasn't on punishment, it was on reform and preventing similar incidents in the future. The convenience store's night clerk testified before the grand jury, describing what he'd seen. His security footage proved invaluable, showing the incident from multiple angles. "I've seen bad things happen before," he told them, "but this time we made sure everything was documented properly." Officer Chen's testimony proved crucial. She spoke about the department's culture, the pressure to stay quiet, and the warning signs she'd noticed but hadn't reported. Her courage in coming forward inspired other officers to share their own concerns about departmental practices. The state police investigation revealed a pattern of targeted stops in affluent neighborhoods during night shifts. The data showed clear bias in how these stops were conducted and who was targeted. Each statistic added another piece to the puzzle they were assembling. In the evidence lab, technicians had reconstructed the entire incident timeline. Every second was accounted for, from the initial stop to the arrival of backup officers. The precision of their work left no room for doubt about what had occurred that night. The police union's internal review brought surprising support for reform. "We can't defend these actions," the union president stated in a closed-door meeting. "This is our chance to be part of the solution." His words marked a significant shift in how such incidents would be handled. Community leaders gathered at town hall meetings to discuss the findings. Instead of angry confrontations, these sessions focused on constructive solutions. Dr. Anderson and her husband attended several, sharing their experience as an example of how proper legal channels could work. The district attorney's office prepared their case methodically. Each piece of evidence was scrutinized, each witness statement verified. They weren't just building a case against one officer, they were creating a precedent for how similar cases should be handled in the future. Training officers from other departments came to study the case. They examined how a routine traffic stop had escalated, identifying critical moments where different choices could have prevented the incident. That findings would influence police training across the country. The FBI's Civil Rights Division expanded their investigation to neighboring departments. Patterns emerged showing similar issues in other precincts. What started as one incident was becoming a catalyst for regional reform in law enforcement practices. As the investigation neared completion, Dr. Anderson continued her work at the hospital, treating patients with the same dedication as always. Her experience had started something important, but she remained focused on her calling, helping others and saving lives. The courthouse buzzed with quiet energy as people filed into the main courtroom. 6 weeks had passed since that fateful traffic stop, and now justice was taking its course. Dr. Anderson sat in the front row, her husband beside her, both dressed professionally as they prepared to hear the grand jury's decision. The district attorney stood before the judge, holding a thick folder of evidence. "The grand jury has reviewed over 300 pieces of evidence," she announced, her voice clear and confident. "This includes video footage from multiple sources, witness testimonies, and documented patterns of similar behavior." Officer Reynolds sat with his defense team, his face noticeably thinner than it had been 6 weeks ago. The weight of evidence against him had grown too heavy to ignore. His attorney had already approached the prosecution about a plea deal, knowing the video evidence alone was damaging enough. The young nursing student who recorded the incident sat a few rows back, still in her scrubs after finishing her morning shift. Her video had become a key piece of evidence, but more importantly, it had sparked a conversation about accountability in law enforcement that was spreading across the country. "The grand jury has returned multiple indictments," the judge announced, reading from the official document. The charges included civil rights violations, assault under color of authority, and filing false police reports. Each charge was backed by solid evidence, gathered methodically over the past weeks. In the police department, officers gathered around televisions watching the proceedings. This case had changed things. New training protocols were already being implemented, and officers were being taught to recognize and report concerning behavior among their colleagues. The convenience store clerk watched from his phone during his break. He'd given his testimony to the grand jury, showing them how he preserved the security footage that proved crucial to the case. His simple act of doing the right thing had helped set major changes in motion. Outside the courthouse, community leaders spoke with reporters. This wasn't just about one officer facing consequences. It was about setting new standards for police conduct and accountability. The case had become a blueprint for handling similar incidents across the country. Dr. Anderson's husband had worked tirelessly with his FBI team to ensure everything was handled properly. No shortcuts, no leaked information, no revenge tactics, just solid investigative work that would stand up to any scrutiny. The results were now speaking for themselves. The police chief stepped up to the podium after the proceedings. Today marks a turning point, he announced. We're implementing new policies, enhanced training, and better oversight. The changes weren't just promises, they were already being put into action. Back in the hospital, Dr. Anderson's colleagues watched the news coverage between patient rounds. They'd supported her throughout the process, covering her shifts when she needed to testify and standing by her side. Her composure during the entire ordeal had earned their respect. The police union representatives met with department leaders to discuss the new reforms. Instead of fighting the changes, they were actively participating in shaping them. We need to rebuild trust, the union president acknowledged. These reforms protect good officers as much as they protect the public. State lawmakers took notice of how the case was handled. They began drafting legislation to standardize police accountability measures across the state. The incident that began with a traffic stop was now influencing police reform at the highest levels. The FBI's Civil Rights Division used the case to create new training materials. They highlighted how proper investigation techniques and patience could lead to meaningful change without resorting to shortcuts or compromising legal principles. As evening fell, Dr. Anderson and her husband left the courthouse. The legal process had worked exactly as it should, methodically, thoroughly, and justly. Their story had become an example of how positive change could come from following proper procedures rather than seeking quick revenge. 1 year had passed since that life-changing traffic stop. The Police Training Academy's classroom was filled with new recruits watching body camera footage from that night. The instructor paused the video at key moments, pointing out how a series of poor decisions had led to serious consequences. This case changed everything, the instructor explained, gesturing to the updated training manuals on each desk. Today, we're going to learn how proper procedures protect both officers and citizens. The room was silent as future officers took notes, understanding the weight of their upcoming responsibilities. At the hospital, Dr. Anderson walked through the emergency room doors, greeting her colleagues as she started another night shift. Her case had led to new safety protocols for medical staff working late hours, including police escort services and emergency alert systems. The FBI field office had transformed its Civil Rights Division. Dr. Anderson's husband's methodical approach to the investigation became the gold standard for handling similar cases. New agents learned how patience and proper procedure could create lasting change without compromising legal principles. The convenience store where everything happened now displayed a Community Safety Award. The night clerk's quick thinking in preserving evidence had inspired a citywide program teaching business owners how to properly document and report incidents of misconduct. Officer Chen, who had arrived as backup that night, now led the department's newly formed accountability unit. We protect our community by holding ourselves to the highest standards, she told a group of veteran officers during a mandatory retraining session. Her courage in speaking up had earned her the respect of both colleagues and citizens. The young nursing students' video had become part of a nationwide training program. Police academies across the country used it to demonstrate the importance of de-escalation techniques and maintaining professional behavior. Her split-second decision to record had helped spark a national conversation about police reform. The police chief stood before the city council, presenting the latest statistics. Complaints against officers had dropped significantly since implementing new training protocols and accountability measures. Real change takes time, he explained, but we're seeing concrete results. In community centers across the city, police officers and local residents participated in regular dialogue sessions. These meetings, born from the aftermath of the incident, helped build understanding between law enforcement and the communities they served. The state legislature had passed what became known as the Professional Conduct Act, requiring all police departments to implement similar reforms. What started as one department's response to a crisis had grown into a statewide movement for positive change. Dr. Anderson and her husband occasionally spoke at law enforcement conferences, sharing their story not as a tale of revenge, but as an example of how proper legal channels could create meaningful reform. Their experience had become a powerful lesson in the importance of professional conduct and accountability. The police union's new leadership embraced the reforms, recognizing that clear standards and proper training protected everyone. Weekly meetings between union representatives and department heads ensured that officers' concerns were addressed while maintaining high professional standards. Local news stations aired a special report on the anniversary of the incident, highlighting the positive changes that had emerged. Instead of focusing on the confrontation, they showcased how the community had come together to create lasting improvements in law enforcement practices. The FBI's Civil Rights Division had expanded its training program, teaching other agencies how to conduct thorough, unbiased investigations. The case had become a model for how federal and local law enforcement could work together effectively to address misconduct and implement reforms. As night fell over the city, a new generation of officers patrolled the streets, equipped with better training, clear guidelines, and a deeper understanding of their responsibilities. The incident that could have torn the community apart had instead become the foundation for positive change, proving that justice worked best when pursued through proper channels.